Welcome. I am not going to show my face today. I am under the weather, or should I say, under a heat index. But I see most people on here are familiar with me. I am going to turn it over to Wa to lead the facilitation for the first 30 minutes or so, and then I'll um you know um dive in a little bit later. But we are grateful to have the BRT team of leaders from the city of Raleigh here. And this is just one of many meetings we've had with them, and something we'll continue to make sure that the community has a voice. And when I say community, that's inclusive community from all walks. And tonight we want to focus on um, communities that are non-able body, disabled, um, um, people such as myself who have mobility issues, or uh, people who may have disabilities and they're not noticeable, and people assume that everything is okay, but it's not. But it is still a disability that needs to be recognized and respected, and they have needs, and things need to be adjusted to make sure that they're accommodated, such as neurodivergency, ADD, autism, so many. I can't even start naming them. Of course, first things that come to mind when we say um, ADA compliant, or visual, hearing impaired. And if I'm saying any of those wrong, please correct me. Our goal is not to disrespect any group population at all. Some of us are familiar with terms in one way. You look on, as my mama says, the Googler, and you see it described one way, and then you go to a disability event, and I've heard another way. So our goal is not to disrespect any group by if we're saying it wrong, but I know for myself how I explain it. But our goal is to be inclusive, for to make sure the BRT accommodates all. And for instance, and I'm gonna turn it over to Wild if I say this, the bus shelters, like those red NC State ones, for someone that's neurodivergent, such as my youngest child, or autistic, depending on what level and what spectrum and such. Those red bus shelters or cause all kind of havoc. Now, I don't feel that I'm neurodivergent. My youngest child, well, other members of my family claim I am, but they're not doctors. But anyway, she is, and I know it bothers and hinders her. Before she left to move to Wisconsin. So, but I don't even know if their voice were included when it came to those red shelters. And so we just want to make sure, well, she was not diagnosed with neurodivergency before she left. So we just want to make sure those voices, and all voices have a voice in what, and make sure they're accommodated in this huge project that's supposed to be helpful for generations to come. Okay, well, thank y'all for coming.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Wanda. I think you raised a very important point that we should keep remembering down the line as far as accessibility and mobility is concerned. We're gonna start off with presentation from the city on the latest update with the Western and Southern BRT. So if anyone from the city has presentation they want to make, I can do a screen. I can make. I can give you a screen share option real quick. Um, Sarah, would that be you that does the presentation?
Hannah is
gonna
actually
be-
gonna, well, Hannah or Chris, I'm not sure which.
Chris, were
do
you gonna
have-
share, or Janet?
Yeah,
I mean, either way,
yeah, I can do it.
anyone can share right now, so.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Uh,
Yeah,
let-
thank you. Thank you for your time this evening. We do have some slides to walk through to kind of give you some information. And then, we want to answer any questions you have. We have some questions for you to sort of start a discussion. Really interested in hearing your thoughts. First, I'll just introduce some of the folks that are online today. My name is Hannah Reckow. I work with Raleigh Planning and Development. I'm leading the Southern BRT station area planning process. Sarah Shaughnessy is also online. She's leading the Western station area planning process. And then two of our other colleagues from planning, Robert Tate and Bronwyn Reedus, are also online. And then we have some folks from the consultant team that's working on this project, Chris Hall and Janet Nain from SOM. And Karen Kay and Michael Ryjoff from SB Friedman, and Julia Entz from Neighboring Concepts. So you'll hear from me. I'm going to give a little bit of the context of this project, and then I'll pass it off to others to kind of walk through where the project is headed. So context is important because, just like the actual design of the bus route and stations, which transit staff is working on, there's been multiple steps to the station area planning processes too. So the context we'll start with, I think everyone here is probably pretty familiar with. Raleigh has been growing for decades pretty steadily. Population increases, and for many decades that's included an increase in land area, which means people are more dispersed. They're farther away from the places they need to go, costs more to travel. So, that's part of the context that decision to fund bus rapid transit came from. Next slide. And that's the context that, Raleigh started thinking, like, if we're going to do all this investment and infrastructure, we really got to think about our land use and our housing and other policy and how we actually want to grow moving forward. That decision being continue as we've done and continue to grow around driving and, and produce something that is not very accessible in a number of ways, or make a shift, grow more around transit, and make all of our other policy decisions show that too. So that's the question that was at the center of the equitable development around transit process. That was a public process. We heard pretty overwhelmingly support for growing around transit, and especially an interest in it being equitable development around transit. So that's about the built form aspect, but also about the service side. And the outcome of that is, that the equitable transit oriented development guidebook, which sort of explains, what the consensus was about what that means and how we might get there. So, it's equitably sharing the benefits of transit, creating transit-centered neighborhoods for residents of all income levels, addressing displacement, and really ensuring that we're not blocking people out by how we built and going into the future. So, more specifically, that means housing affordability is really important, addressing displacement is really important, preserving businesses, generating opportunities for more jobs to locate near transit, making sure that pedestrian safety is really central, not only safety, but also pedestrian comfort. And then removing barriers for more people to live and work and be able to shop close to transit. And then also not just setting it and forgetting it, but knowing that we might not get it right entirely the first time, and we want to measure the outcomes and keep tweaking as we go along so we can really make this work. So that's the work that came out of that EDIT process, that stationary planning is building off of. Stationary planning is one of the ways to implement this vision. So, just wanted to start with that context. This is a really big project, and so kind of building off of each project so we can, in this process, get more specific recommendations specific to the southern corridor and specific to the western corridor that can be more impactful. So I'll stop there and pass to Chris.
Yeah, I can pick it up from here. And so I guess, just backgrounds, again, the bus rapid transit itself, the, fundamental system, like I'm sure everybody has seen versions of this previously, but it's fundamentally about moving people more efficiently between their homes, their jobs, their services, their healthcare, the stores they need to go to, education opportunities. And it's a way of creating a new kind of transit that works within existing streets, so you don't have to build a rail line, and it stops more frequently than you might see under rail, but it also moves much more quickly and more intentionally through streets than regular buses do. So it's really about moving people around. There are two corridors, and again, you've probably seen this before, but there's the Western Corridor that does extend from downtown Raleigh to out to Cary, connecting through a really interesting and diverse area of parks, campuses, neighborhoods, places of work, as it does so. Connecting downtown, but also connecting places along the corridor. This isn't just about kind of getting into downtown and out again. It's an opportunity for people to move up and down the corridor and connect to different opportunities along that. So this is the area we've been looking at, and generally the focus of the work that we're doing is station areas. So these are the areas around the BRT stations when those decisions are made. There's some generalized ideas of where the stations are, but they're not absolutely set at this point. And again, there's kind of background that supports different aspects of planning, from the transit itself to policy considerations to equity. And then a couple of years ago, there was a study of kind of urban design within the corridor that looked at ways that you could maybe begin to shape development, but also think about open spaces, pedestrian connections, and bike connections. So those policies are in place. And then, of course, the city a few years ago adopted an overlay, which I think most people are familiar with here, that kind of provided incentives for affordable housing and other benefits in certain locations that were close to some of these identified station areas. And then Southern Corridor, because we do have two corridors which are on the table right now. Again, goes from downtown Raleigh, but extends south, really, using South Wilmington as its main corridor, and then connecting down to Garner. So there are a number of station opportunities here as well. We turned the map here because it's a long corridor, runs north-south, so you can see this a little more easily. The Walmart and that cluster of retail around Garner, and then coming up Wilmington into downtown. So, and again, there was the TOD overlay from a few years ago, which is still in progress, still kind of maturing out, and we're seeing what kinds of effects that has. There were previous plans for this corridor, some of them not so long ago, the Southern Gateway plan that explored what the nature of development could be. The BRT wasn't set then, but there was an idea that transit would come. There's a Dix Edge area study that was carried out over the last couple of years. Again, not the whole area, but certainly has an influence on the north area. So when we think about station area planning, there are a number of different themes and ideas that we're looking at. One is about stronger mobility. And that's a kind of the bigger scale of, you want to be able to get to transit, and transit can move you around the city and get you to all the places you need to be. But we also think it's about walking and biking, and how people can more safely and in a healthier way get to those transit opportunities. So we think there's opportunities to kind of improve the general kind of condition of streets and bike and open space connections. I think also it's great, the opening comments about accessibility as well, and really meeting the needs of people who have different levels of mobility and may have different visual understandings, different neurological approaches to the world as well. So that's certainly part of the consideration. We're also looking at development diversity, and diversity means many different things in this context. It's about housing, but it can also be about retail. It can be about jobs. It can be about townhomes. It can be about apartments or mixed-use buildings. It can be about affordable housing, and it can be about market rate housing as well. So we're interested in exploring development diversity. It's about streets and public spaces. We want this to be, all of the station areas to be attractive, to be places that people want to spend time, supporting local businesses. So the streets and public spaces should be really attractive. It is also about equity. And in this context, affordable housing is an absolute consideration. And in a few minutes, Michael and Karen will talk you through some of the emerging affordable housing strategies and proposals. But housing is a really important consideration, but so are jobs, so are services. Equity isn't just one thing. It's not just housing, it's across a whole range of other different considerations in terms of how people live their daily lives. We're really interested in landscapes and sustainable landscapes. We've heard so much from people in the community as we've talked with them over the last 6 or 8 months about the importance of trees, landscape, managing stormwater, all in ways that benefit the community, create a more attractive place, but also a more sustainable and habitable place as well. And that's for everybody. These are, access to nature and sustainable landscape should be something that all members of the community should have access to. So maybe just to we could take a quick breather here before we get into the details around the affordable housing strategies. But, the key elements around equity, the framework are enhanced access to jobs and services, supporting affordable housing, thinking about housing for the next generation, because people are having children. There's a rising generation. We need to think about where the next generation are going to live. So within existing communities, there is growth as next generation. So how do we house them? Supporting businesses that are in place today, but also thinking about new job and wealth building opportunities for residents and for business owners. New and enhanced sidewalk and bike connections. Some areas don't have sidewalks. We think they should. And it's this is an opportunity to really start to think about how that relates to station areas and how we can make places more walkable generally. Then reducing heat islands, as sites develop, thinking about shade trees, as streets are renewed, thinking about shade trees, landscapes, if there are new buildings, having green roofs, all of those things are important to making all neighborhoods as sustainable and as comfortable as places to live as we can make them, as well as incorporating community relevant art. That was also something that we heard a lot about in previous conversations. And when we were talking about BRT stations in conjunction with these wider station areas, that came up as well. But should we just leave it there, take a breather and see if there are any immediate questions? But I do want to make sure that we get to Michael and Karen and the affordable housing strategies, which they've really been focusing on over the last few months.
Thank you, Chris. So you want to open the floor for questions for the time being? See, I do see in the chat from Laurel and Bailey, I rode buses for years elsewhere. How does BRT differ from regular bus system? Are there frequent bus stops, or does it just go from one spot to another quickly?
Yeah, there
Good
are.
question.
Yep.
Oh, I was just going to say, Chris, if you can go back maybe to one of the route maps.
Yeah.
So a couple things make BRT differ. There's stations instead of stops. So that's designed for faster boarding and easier boarding, dedicated lanes in a lot of ways. So you're not really competing with traffic. And then other things like working with the signals to prioritize the stops. So they're stopping in traffic less in general. And then also really frequent service. So a 15-minute service. In terms of the bus frequency of bus stops, I would say it's less than kind of a local bus. Go back to one of the maps, maybe we can have a visual on that. Yeah, so for example, the Western Corridor, you can see there's quite a few stops, but not.
Yeah, I think in the, that this one is 12 miles and there are 20 stations. So, and some areas have more and they're closer together. But generally,
And
half a mile.
Laurelyn, I see your follow-up question. A big piece of stationary planning is looking at what is sometimes called first and last mile mobility. So recognizing that these stops are near something, but maybe not directly near the exact destination that people need to go. So how can we make sure that it's safe and comfortable to walk maybe a portion of a mile, or if people have a bike and can bike, and that extends the with the combination between them. That is a really big piece of it, and I think a piece that is essential for it to be successful. So,
And let's see. Mary Dobrik has another question. Why is the current bus system so terrible? How would this not just be more terrible service like we currently have now working for us? That's a point of question, but yes, I'd like to know about that.
I think I would just say, there's dedicated funding for this. It is by design meant to be kind of higher level of transit service. And that it's kind of like a backbone of more frequent transit that's going to work with the existing local service to expand people's access by transit. But if you have specific concerns that stationary planning can address, whether that's some aspect that would help it work better for you, we want to hear that.
Thank you. And Josh, you're on stack. You want to unmute yourself, Josh?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I've got a question. I mean, since the TOD is largely going to gentrify out a lot of the people that normally ride the bus, is there a plan in place to prevent that from happening? Because a mixed units includes market rate. If you're going into areas that don't have market rate, it's going to push up the housing prices anyway. And are we prepared for this to fail because we have gentrified out people that normally ride the bus? I mean, what do we have a plan in place to prevent it from becoming a money hole because the people that normally ride the bus are no longer going to be able to live on a bus line?
So we've got some more slides that are going to cover some of our housing, kind of where we're headed with the housing recommendation. So we can dive into that next, and would love your thoughts on that.
I'll have one question response, and then we can move on to the next set of speakers. Wanda, you're asking what are they planning to do with other bus services? I'm guessing that means what are they doing with existing bus services when you have bus rapid? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, like, I do understand that these services, BRT, will go places that where services don't exist, like past the Walmart. I get that. But also they just don't go past the Walmart.
Mhm.
So what about the services that are going to Walmart right now?
Yeah, so I don't know, we don't have transit staff here, so I don't know if we can speak in like a lot of detail about a specific corridor, but I know that the intent is that local service will continue to run and they'll take a look at how the two like local bus service and BRT interact so that people can continue to use the routes that are useful and maybe can use the two together to get even more places.
Yeah, that would be great, especially as you mentioned that misconnection, that misstep to get somewhere faster, where like if it doesn't go to on the other side of Garner past not the Wait Tech side, but the other side going down towards Clayton. Maybe
Okay.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that
Mhm.
would be great because everything goes to Wait Tech side. You got like 5 buses going there, but not
Mhm.
a lot goes towards Clayton. So maybe, but there's a lot going on in Johnston County. People don't realize. So just my thought, but I'm going back on mute.
Maybe it's a good time for us to run through the rest of the
Sure.
slides.
So I think Michael is up first, going to talk about existing housing conditions. Then Karen's going to talk about the strategies.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, and thank you everyone for coming. Really excited to talk to you all. I know we've already had some questions on housing, and this is clearly top of mind for a lot of people on this call. So I do want to be here to answer those questions and kind of walk you through some of the housing stats related to Raleigh and Wake County that we're seeing as part of our work on this project. As housing justice advocates, I know you may be familiar with a lot of these already, but even so, I'll walk through these so we can have a kind of shared vocabulary for kind of talking about these questions. So as this slide shows, housing and transportations are generally two of the largest monthly costs for a household. So when we're talking about putting affordable housing near transit, there is a twofold benefit to that, since you can lower both the housing costs and the transit costs for households in the transit areas. One of the city's goals generally, as Sarah outlined, Hannah outlined, apologies, when she was talking about EDAT, one of the goals for the city and for the study is to prioritize housing and affordable housing near transit, such as along these BRT corridors. Next slide, please. Yes, I can speak louder. Thank you, Wanda. This chart shows renter households by income level and how many rental households are how rental housing units are affordable to them in Wake County. The one acronym I will use during this presentation is AMI. It stands for Area Median Income. It's a common way to split up households by income level. So those numbers you see across the bottom of the chart, the lowest category, 30% AMI, that corresponds to an income of around $31,000 for a household of three. We estimate a current shortfall of around 20,000 homes that are affordable to the lowest income households at this AMI level. So there is a gap here, and one of the goals of this study is, again, kind of working to address that gap. On the other side of the chart, there are also relatively few units that kind of are intended for households with higher incomes. So those households compete with more moderate income households for kind of the housing stock in the middle. So as the metro area grows, there is a lot of competition for those homes. And one of the reasons for why we're seeing price increases in certain areas. Next slide, please. So I'll just quickly walk through the western and the southern corridors. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of these numbers, but the western corridor is home to around 32,700 households. About 2/3 of those households are renters. On average, there are more homeowners on the Cary side of the corridor and more renters throughout the Raleigh side of the corridor. The Western corridor is also bookended by higher income zones in and around downtown Cary and then in and around downtown Raleigh. The central segments are generally more home to lower and more moderate income residents. Meanwhile, the southern corridor is currently home to around 15,500 households, of which around 65% are renter households and 35% are owner households. It's primarily renters north of I-40 and owners south of I-40. And on average, household incomes along the corridor are lower than that for Wake County as a whole. This slide shows how we can break out different homes that are in the market, that are in a community. Starting from the left and going to the right, there are two types of affordable homes. This is like lowercase housing affordability. There are those with legal restrictions, and there are also unsubsidized affordable homes. These are homes that are on the market, but have lower rents that are affordable to a much wider segment of the population, but they don't have any legal restrictions in place that ensure that those rents stay low. Besides those, there are also many higher cost housing units that are on the market, but these have higher rents or higher prices that aren't necessarily affordable to lower or moderate income households. And this is just how we can break up different housing that's in the market. Next slide, please. This chart looks at both of the corridors, so the western corridor and the southern corridor, and works to group the housing that's currently there into these three different buckets. So both corridors, higher cost housing is prevalent, especially in the downtown areas, but there are substantial portions of both legally restricted and also unsubsidized affordable housing. So as we work through the study, it's not just about adding more affordable housing and thinking about affordable housing strategies, it's also about preserving what is currently in those station areas. Slide, please. This slide is just looking at the multifamily housing inventory in the two corridors, both affordable and market rates. For both corridors, a substantial share of the multifamily housing was built since 2011. In addition, there are many multifamily projects that are in the development pipeline currently, but most of these are in the downtown and greater downtown area. We're not seeing a lot of development outside of the downtown in certain parts of the western and southern corridors. This chart looks at rental housing vacancy. So in both Wake County and Raleigh, where the stats are pretty similar, rental vacancy decreased during the early 2010s, but has increased in those two geographies since 2017. This is likely in part the result of new rental housing built in the second half of the last decade. In 2021, Wake County had a rental vacancy rate of 6.5%, which is maybe moderately constrained, but I guess not as tight as some of the markets that we're seeing around the country. This chart looks at average multifamily rents. So the rents in Raleigh generally are similar to those in Wake County. In 2023, the average rent in both of those places was around $1.40 per square foot. Rent peaked in 2022 for both new and older product, both in the Raleigh area and around the country. There were really substantial rent increases at the start of COVID. But in a lot of places, like we're seeing in Raleigh, on average, of course, those rents have started to level out a little bit. New market rate housing does have higher rents than older market rate housing. The average rent for new construction multifamily was around $1.85 in Raleigh compared to $1.80 for Wake County. So on average, the newer housing product in Raleigh is a little bit more expensive than what we're seeing in other parts of the county. Next slide, please. And finally, this is also a vacancy chart, but just for the for sale market, the housing ownership market. Wake County and Raleigh have very low owner vacancy rates, in contrast maybe to what we're seeing in the rental market. The countywide vacancy was 0.8% in 2021, which indicates a very tight for sale market. What we typically see in markets that have a healthy for sale market is around 2.5%. So Wake County and Raleigh have a very constrained for sale market, and I think that's one of the reasons why we see huge price increases in the cost of for sale housing. The owner vacancy rate has steadily decreased since 2011, indicating that the supply hasn't kept up with demand as the region has grown. So those are just some of the key housing stats. Happy to go into more detail as you have questions later, but for now, I'm going to pass it over to Karen to share what we've heard over the last several rounds of community engagement.
Thanks, Michael. So like Michael was just talking through with those different data points, from a desktop analysis side, what we see is a lot of demand for housing within the market. And because of that, price increases, vacancy decreases, and there's just a lot of competition. But we know that we can't just stop from kind of that analytical desktop research standpoint. So we've spent time engaging with both community members, stakeholders, and then members of the development community to try and ground what we're seeing in the data through conversations with both residents and real estate professionals within the market. So I'm going to do a quick recap of what we heard and then kind of provide that bridge to where it's leading us on the strategy side. So at both of the community open houses that we've had so far, we've made sure to ask questions about affordable housing in terms of key needs and then priorities for the eventual station area planning process. And some of the big themes that we've heard are ideas like we need ways in which we can control rent. And I'm not talking New York City rent control, but ways in which we can manage rent and affordability within these station areas. We've heard that we need to prioritize the development of affordable housing for those deeply affordable units. So like Michael mentioned, households earning less than $30,000 per year, there's an existing gap within the market. And so we want to make sure that we're prioritizing housing construction for those households. We also heard the last two are kind of similar concepts, but that there's a need for housing diversity. And so that's diversity of typology in terms of we need renter housing, we need owner housing, but also intended for various different age groups. So entry-level housing for kind of your first-time buyer, housing for seniors to downsize into, options for seniors who need to age in place and might need assisted living. We've talked a lot about these different housing typologies that create places for everyone within the station areas. And then we've also, again, heard that we just need to make sure that there's housing at all different price points because doing so will allow for kind of more fluidity in the market. And that's all the way down to kind of those deeply affordable units. If you go to the next slide. As I mentioned, we've also done engagement with the developer community because all of what I just said sounds great, but it needs to be grounded in strategies that kind of appeal towards what is financially feasible, or if things aren't financially feasible from a market side, we need to understand what the gaps are so we can structure strategies and programs that are most impactful to those needs and unlock opportunities to build affordable housing that best meets those priorities. So in those conversations we've had with real estate professionals, we've heard things like the region is growing so quickly that we just have to build more housing. Otherwise, because of the kind of relationship between supply and demand, prices will continue to grow up. We've also heard that generally, because of the kind of real estate market and where we're at right now, it's challenging to underwrite or to build higher density projects. And so these mid-rise developments are being built, which maybe aren't maxing out the unit capacity within station areas. But that's the reality of where the market is today. And to be able to continue to add units, that's what we need to be planning for. We've also heard that land prices have increased sharply because there is an understanding of how much demand there is within the market. And from a property owner standpoint, there is certainly perceived value in land that's making it difficult to develop market rate housing, but then also certainly to acquire land to build affordable housing. We also had an affordable housing small group discussion that was really centered around what we are seeing in the data. So we provided some of the data that Michael just talked through in addition to some more in a meeting that was where we invited some members on this call actually, in addition to other nonprofits, city staff, representatives from the land trust and others to make sure that we were kind of grounding what we were seeing in the data again with those early conversations with housing advocates And there were three big themes that came out of that affordable housing small group discussion. For our first question, where we asked kind of what does a good outcome look like for these station areas from an affordable housing perspective. And we heard that one need was to increase that rent restricted housing production. A second was to prioritize housing near transit. We've heard some conversation around what good is the BRT if there aren't units that are within close proximity to the stations themselves. And so we heard about needing to prioritize affordable housing directly near or within that last mile of transit stations. And then we also spent quite a bit of time talking about the need to preserve affordability for existing residents. Michael talked about the concentrations of low and moderate income households that live within these corridors in renter occupied housing and that don't have kind of control necessarily over value change. And so we made sure to talk about ways in which we should be thinking about affordable housing preservation. And we'll kind of start talking about some strategies here in a minute that came out of those conversations. We asked a second question in that small group discussion, which was around this concept of many different priorities. Obviously, there are a lot of needs when we think about housing. Some I've already alluded to. We just generally need to increase the supply of housing. We need to increase the supply of affordable housing at moderate income levels, at deeply affordable levels for those lowest area median income households. You know, it's difficult because there are trade-offs in the decisions that we're making. We wanted to have conversations with stakeholders and advocates around what do we view as the top priority? If we can't do everything, where should we start and what should we be kind of rising to the top of the priority list from this planning process? And what we heard from a voting exercise that we did, the kind of runaway priority was to increase the supply of those deeply affordable housing units that the market just can't serve on its own. And so that's something that you'll see in ultimately when we kind of hone in on strategies, we know that we need to focus on strategies which increase those deeply affordable units. Some other priorities that rose to the top were maximizing density within the station areas, so the most number of people and households possible can benefit from a big infrastructure investment like this. And then other priorities that kind of rose to the top were things like providing assistance to existing homeowners to improve the condition of housing, and then protecting historically Black communities that, again, might not have housing stability or control over their housing affordability as prices change. Flip to the next slide. We then kind of concluded the small group discussion with a broader conversation around what existing strategies are working within the Raleigh area and what do we need to be doing to potentially refine the strategies to be more impactful and better meet those needs. And so what we heard was that the kind of across the board, the existing funding programs are critical to unlocking development opportunities. Obviously, when you're thinking about affordable housing for low-income households, it requires substantial subsidy. So we heard one, the existing tools out there are powerful and we need that funding. But we also heard that there's just a shortfall of the capital to meet the demand, that we simply need more, and therefore we need to continue to kind of prioritize affordable housing construction with the tools that we have available and best leverage the sources while continuing to advocate and find more opportunities to build housing. We also heard that that unsubsidized affordable housing that Michael talked about, that's rental housing without deed restrictions in place, is really challenging from a strategy standpoint to preserve today, that the tools in the market don't necessarily meet the needs. And so we know that we need to design strategies around protection of affordability for renters within these station areas. And so we're starting to have conversations about how we do that. And then we also heard that the kind of speculative nature of land writ large in Raleigh makes it very challenging to build more affordable housing because it's difficult to attain land. And so we need to think about how to use city-owned property and just be really creative in working with nonprofits to unlock those opportunities. So some general strategy recommendations that we're starting to kind of go down the avenue towards. One, increasing access to patient long-term capital. I actually saw in the chat there are empty housing units in the downtown. A second thing that was mentioned during the small group discussion was to have a landlord engagement program to make sure that we're connecting property owners with rental vouchers and to again optimize the inventory that we have available to us. Michael talked about how vacancy is upticking a little bit in some places, and so let's connect people who need housing with landlords who maybe haven't been creative enough with the ways in which they're renting out their units historically, leveraging publicly owned land. And then the other big idea that we heard was creating a citizen advisory committee for housing program development. And again, this is around the concept that historically we might not have heard the voices of the people who are ultimately the end users of affordable housing. And so we need to make sure that as we develop programs, we find ways to make sure that people who will benefit from those programs can make sure that they are meeting their needs, as opposed to, you know, structuring a program in a tower and not connecting the program development with the end user. So all of those conversations and the analysis have kind of led us to 4 big affordable housing priorities that we have for the transit-oriented development planning process. 1 is to create additional legally restricted affordable housing. 2, preserve the naturally occurring affordable housing that we know exists today and is a huge component of the affordable housing stock. 3, support the existing renters, whether that be through stabilization in the event of rent increases, improving the quality of housing. And then 4, to promote homeownership and encourage ways in which existing folks within the corridor can build equity. So we are still in the process of refining strategies, but knowing those are the priorities and knowing kind of nationally what the world of affordable housing policy is, we've started to pull together housing best practices and that other communities are already implementing that meet those 4 priorities that we just mentioned, and that are ultimately going to lead to a short list of strategies to include within this plan. And I'm just going to touch on 4 of these case studies that we're using as kind of our goalposts and are helping us structure strategies in the Raleigh context. The first is the Middleton Energy Efficiency Navigator Program. This is out of Middleton, Wisconsin, which is a suburb of Madison. And the program leveraged federal funds from the American Rescue Plan to provide grants for energy efficiency improvements for unsubsidized affordable homes. So if a landlord or a property owner wanted to install new windows and doors to make a unit more energy efficient, that would come, they would receive a grant to do so, but it would come with the requirement that they preserve affordability for a defined period of time for those existing renters. So it's a kind of tricky way of both improving the energy efficiency of a unit, but then also preserving affordability for a defined period of time. The second program we're looking at is from Ascent Housing, who manages a housing impact fund in Charlotte, North Carolina. So this is kind of right down the road, and it's a creative impact fund that leverages capital from multiple different nonprofits, the county, the city, and it all channels through a nonprofit that then goes out and acquires naturally occurring affordable housing and commits to preserving affordability for a 15-year period of time. And they do that by 1, having all of that patient capital, you know, aligned municipal partners who kind of feed that capital into the nonprofit that effectively then preserves the naturally occurring affordable housing. But then they also use synthetic TIF to offer rent vouchers to scale basically the rent to meet to make sure that rent does not exceed what would be affordable for the households who then get to live in those units or stay living within those units. So again, just leveraging all of the tools available to preserve affordability for naturally occurring affordable housing. The third example is the Perpetual Housing Fund. This is a model that's kind of one of the first of its kind out of Salt Lake City in Utah. The kind of basics of this program is in the world of affordable housing, low-income housing tax credits are kind of the end-all be-all. It's what historically or for decades now have been the primary source of funding for affordable housing. And this just kind of puts a spin on the ways in which those tax credits are used. So they're still used to build affordable rental housing, but then ultimately the housing units that are built are designed to convert to home ownership at a point in time several years after the project has stabilized, and low and moderate income home owners have been living there for several years. As they're paying rent for the first several years that they're living there, it effectively starts building their equity in the project, and the nonprofit that is the owner on day 1 commits to converting the building into essentially a condo over time. So instead of just paying rent and kind of losing that equity, homeowners who couldn't necessarily pay a down payment effectively just pay that over time. And then the last strategy that we wanted to highlight is the concept of using a racial equity impact assessment to think about programs. This came out of the conversation, again, in that small housing or small affordable housing group discussion around making sure that programs best meet the needs of their end users. Chicago implemented a racial equity impact assessment framework for their program several years ago, and they used it most recently for their housing department to assess the impact of their qualified allocation plan, which is how they deploy housing tax credits to build affordable housing. And it's basically just this lens that makes you ask critical questions about in designing this program, is it best meeting the needs of disadvantaged groups? And ultimately, doing a racial equity impact assessment on the qualified allocation plans led to recommendations like prioritizing funding for BIPOC developers to make sure that the affordable housing tax credits would go into the hands of nonprofits who are kind of engaged within the communities. It went into redefining the criteria to more effectively meet the needs of the eventual renter and things like that. So it's just early on in the process and thinking about how funds are spent, being really critical internally and thinking about how the program can be structured to best meet the needs of end users. So those are just 4 examples. They will eventually morph into a set of strategies underneath each of the priorities that I previously discussed. But that's kind of food for thought and trying to see how we've taken data, engagement, and then ultimately priorities and case studies that will lead into strategies in the final plan. We're happy to answer any questions now.
Yeah, should we open it up? Bart, do you want to go? We had some questions.
Yeah,
I will have
I'm
questions.
looking at the question now. So thanks for the presentation. And let's see. There have been quite a bit of questions being posted on chat. Let's see who. Oh yeah, Nathan, I promised you that you will be the first to go on stack for the question you have about station area planning. So go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you all for presenting and answering our questions tonight. My question is more to do with the first half of the presentation, since I was the last to stack before the second half. But my understanding from the transit group is that BRT will also act as a new backbone for Go Raleigh bus routes, so that there's more hubs rather than just more square station. In relation to station area planning, because of this, would you anticipate platforms or bus stops where 3 or more buses may be stopped at a time? And if so, would there be accommodations to make sure that new bus arrivals and departures are accessible to the hearing and visually impaired and those with mobility needs? Because just as an example, I find at Moore Square, buses for a given route will not stop at a designated spot along the long and often pretty crowded platform. So even without considering accessibility needs, they can be tricky to catch in time when you're transferring to another route. And there are signs up at Moore Square, and there were voice announcements at one point, even though they were turned off last time I was there, but they're pretty small and not precise enough, just because there's no like clear stop designation for bus. So bus number 2 might be like near the start of platform D, for example, and then the next time route 2 comes in, it'll be like near the other opposite end. So will there be planning around that, or is this something that is more going to be under the purview of the transit folks?
Yeah, I think that is definitely more of the focus of transit. So we can put some contact information in the chat and help you connect with transit staff. I know that there is generally an interest in serving all users and really keeping an eye on the accessibility. But we can connect you with folks who can maybe answer your question a little bit more directly.
Right. Hopefully we get a response from that. If you want, Nathan, you want to share your contact info. Great. And I see, Laura and Bailey, you have a question on how to expect everyone, especially those who are physically challenged or seniors with other issues, to walk or ride a bike to bus stations when months of the year the temperature is extremely high and expected to get higher in future years. I think that's legit. Yeah. What's the response to that?
Yeah, I would say it's not really about an expectation that anyone use a particular mode, but widening the options that are available for people who are interested in using that mode. So, you know, the challenge it might take to walk a certain path, you know, we're looking at the comfort and safety of that route, and that it also includes shade, as Chris mentioned, and that his portion, you know, a piece of this is thinking about kind of the greenness of the area. So, what type of landscaping, and you know, opportunities to put more green in an area to help with heat, and then also, you know, on the transit design side, you know, the actual design of the stations themselves involves coverage too.
Helen, I see your hands up? Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I was trying to you mentioned shade and but and all the pictures that you showed of the stations showed them near things like restaurants and buildings and things, and at least on the Newbern one, everything is going to be in the middle of the street, and I assume that's what you're going to do on Western too, is drop the stations in the middle where people have to walk across kind of the same questions, that getting the station areas are not going to promote community if they're stuck out in the middle of the street, if you understand what you mean. And then in Newbern they're taking down a lot of shade, but as far as how do you make it easier for people to access those stations and make them more comfortable, you know, it is really hard to get across Western Boulevard. I've tried it. I worked over there, and it is how you quiet the traffic around it. You know, how do you do that? I guess is my question.
So, I know I could throw in a few things here. I think your question about stations in the center or next to the sidewalk is an important one. I know both routes it's a mix, so not all of the routes stations are in the middle. Many of them are on the sidewalk, but it's kind of an important issue. As part of this process, we're looking at all of the kind of how people really walk those last 2 or 3 minutes to the station as well. So improving intersections, improving pedestrian safety. There are some clear areas where, you know, having mapped where there are collisions between pedestrians and cars, where there needs to be kind of additional work. So those are kind of things we've been looking at, is how do you make those intersections safer, more pedestrian signals, more obvious kind of sidewalks. It's, create sidewalk environments just so drivers understand that somebody's going to be walking there. So those elements are all on the table. The shading is important. One of the benefits actually of kind of having, apartment buildings, the street is that it creates shade. In addition to trees, actually buildings too. So I walked from transit tonight in 92 degrees to my house. And I walked on the shady side of the street and I was shaded by buildings and trees. So, that's different than having, a big surface parking lot, which you would have to walk across where you're really exposed. The concrete heats up, the heat rises, you have sun coming down. So I guess one of the ideas here is walkability is about how buildings relate to the street, how they can create shade, as well as having shade trees and making sure that the transit facilities themselves, the stations, have shelters. So it's certainly on kind of everybody's mind.
Thank you for that. Let's see. Might be relevant to the comment. I see that there's a comment from Laura about accessibility. Raleigh has always had a bad bus system. I don't see how BRT could help. It seems to be an excuse for development of your housing. I wish Raleigh had spent its resources on electric buses and having them available every 15 minutes through neighborhood, that is all. And it is hot outside in the shade in Raleigh. Yeah, that is still definitely a concern. And let's see, I'll see two more questions. Okay. Wanda, you have a question on the chat about whether or not the city staff have an inventory list of all the city-owned properties, and your hand is also up. Would you like to add if you have any other questions?
No, they can answer those, and then I'll if there's somebody in between my questions, I'll wait, but they can answer that and I'll wait until my next turn if there are other.
I was gonna raise your question and then you can ask the following ones if we have one. So yeah, the question is whether or not the city has an inventory list of all the city-owned properties.
So I don't think that's something that we have right now to show. There, ownership is publicly available information. You could go to iMaps and search for City of Raleigh, and I think quite a few properties would come up.
We've tried. Now it might be more prevalent now that Amala is there, and that's my other question, I guess, too. Are you all working closely with Amala? I heard all those statistics and, housing available and this and, things that we weren't able to get before. And, unless we do a FOIA from housing.
You mean housing in neighborhoods, Emila?
Yeah, Emila. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we're coordinating with all the relevant departments that includes housing in neighborhoods, definitely.
And have you seen her what is the thing called, her slides and presentation around homelessness and the crisis and such? Have you all seen that?
You're referring to one she presented recently at City Council? Yeah, I think I saw that presentation.
All right. Yeah.
That's
great. Awesome. Because that as far as when you said, I see on here what other tools could be considered, and do you have affordable housing tools from elsewhere that could be used? And I think considering the homeless crisis or tools that could be used when you're speaking of housing, looking at that, those numbers as well as far as determining the housing that, they say the housing crisis is just going to get worse. I don't feel we have a housing crisis when there are lots and lots of empty buildings, or middle missing crisis when we have lots of middle missing, when we have a lot of middle housing that they're building constantly, but and they're mixed housing and they're at that price range, but we don't have, as you all mentioned before, that lower income. Another thing I'm not sure you're aware of, when they do build lower income, they don't necessarily include accessible or visual or housing for someone that needs a visual impaired housing or hearing impaired housing. They do not. Raleigh Housing Authority is the one who told us that. And it's also not in their numbers, or even when they do their waiting list, they don't know how many people need that housing. So your numbers are going to be misguided because they don't know, because they don't divide it up to know how many homeless people such as myself need handicap housing, because they don't divide it up. And that has been many of the issues. So as Laura Lynn was saying, as Nate was saying, as I'm trying to say, and I think maybe that should be maybe just a whole totally different talk that we have, and bring in more people from the accessible community around how, if housing isn't doing it, and they have admitted it to us because we've had meetings with them. How are you all going to determine where these stations are going to be to best meet our needs? As Nate was saying, you can't hardly get to the buses and such, and that, and the timing of the buses is because they don't know where we are and when we're coming there, how many people, as you just gave those statistics of lower income or this many houses in this area. They're now the people who work in with a disability population, disability community, of course they have those numbers. But has anyone ever presented to you all the numbers of the visually impaired, so you know how many are coming through who may need busing, a certain type of buses or whatever, or ride the bus at the stations? I already know the answer is no, because that's what's happening downtown. They don't know. Let me tell you who does know: the bus driver. The bus driver knows their riders now. Now they know if Bob, who's visually impaired, ain't here and don't never miss a day, they're gonna wait maybe another 2 or 3 minutes for Bob because they know their riders. But when they did that whole building of or whatever and deciding how to ride out, they didn't include, and that was, I know that wasn't a whole talk or subject matter to think of, as I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but we weren't speaking of neurodivergency, autism, and those things, but those things are also real and prevalent. But that just wasn't brought up then, but it exists. The type of lighting can throw you off, and have you going to, a different RTP than you're supposed to go to. So, like I said, I would love to just have a whole discussion on it. I work with the North Carolina, the disability rights for North Carolina, other people in the community to have those discussions and also to get those numbers. Because if we're going to do this, my whole thing is I hate seeing people left out, excluded. Everyone needs to feel like they belong, especially if their taxes are being used. And that's where you see people wanting to start protesting and getting angry. I don't know if you know, a while back where there were a whole bunch of people who went downtown and they were frustrated because they get Medicaid and the buses were not picking them up on time and they were missing their doctor's appointments. Now, Medicaid is a state issue and a state issue. But they decided to come downtown because they found out that those people have a contract also with the city. So they were putting pressure on them different ways. That shouldn't have been done, didn't have to be done if people were listening, if they would have, did some vetting from the beginning. And that's all that's what we're about here with Wake County Housing Justice Coalition. And we just want that voice, as Nate said, that's why that's happening there. We don't want that happening at the station area. Understand?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you for those comments. Yeah, agree.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think it's a good reminder that we need to be really intentional in the language that we use in the plan to acknowledge the populations, Wanda, that you mentioned. And so we can make sure that that happens and that everyone is represented in the planning process.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that because I do get a little and I try to hold my cursing back and everything because every time someone says I'm over here with a wheelchair and a walker and hopefully get a little motor scooter soon, and y'all say walkability, I said everybody blah 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 can't walk blah blah and be ready to cuss. Who are y'all talking about? As someone just mentioned before, everybody can't walk, and I hear it all the time at city council. Walkability. Who you talking about? So yes, yeah, definitely. Please. It's so sensitive to us saying those words.
Yeah. And Josh, you're on stack.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I've got a question. I'm hearing a lot that the market has a hard time of meeting the demand, especially of the housing needed for the people at the lowest end of the economic spectrum, if you will. But if the city owns land adjacent, especially near these stations, wouldn't it be worth our while to investigate ways the city can build housing itself on city-owned land? It could work with a community college, it could work with vocational programs at high school, maybe, work it into training. But if the city were to decide to take it in their hands, to not rely on developers to come in and do it, reprioritize the budget, instead of $10 million for pickleball courts, you could build several units for that, especially if you cut out the profit motive, and then you could build them grade from the ground up with all the accessibility in mind, right? You could if you survey and find out the population that needs it and find out what their needs are, you could build the suit. And it just seems like if you cut the profit motive out of it, then you could do a whole lot more with less, right? Because you're not worrying about profits, you're worrying about trying to create a place, a transit system that isn't doomed to fail, because if people cannot afford to live around right with direct access to it because the market conditions won't allow it. And then, like Laura Lynn said and Wanda said, that like if you're pushing people out further and further, and there are, then that puts the people that have any kind of disability in even a tougher spot, because they're pushed out of where they are, and then they have to go further in order to get to the access to the stuff that y'all were trying to, I guess, plan into it. But has it been considered that the city just, prioritize funds in a way that, since we have land, that we could just build the housing ourselves and not worrying about nonprofits and not worrying about developers and weird fits of conscience might decide not to just see Raleigh as a vampire sees its next victim? Over.
Anna, do you want me to take that?
Sure, yeah, good.
Yes and yes. So wholeheartedly agree. And it's definitely something that the city has historically prioritized is leveraging city-owned land to build affordable housing. I will say that the city as like a developer is not as efficient as nonprofit partners. So this historic approach has been to issue RFPs on city-owned property. But land is a heavy negotiating tool. So when you issue an RFP for publicly owned land, you can require a long list of things of what you expect to see happen when nonprofit partners develop that affordable housing. And so you get all of those, or you can kind of require all of those different public policy priorities that Joshua, you just mentioned. We did look at the kind of financial reality of acquiring land to provide kind of more space for affordable housing. And that, I will say, does not necessarily make sense. It makes sense to leverage existing city-owned land and then subsidize kind of on a gap basis affordable housing on non-city-owned land because the cost to acquire land is so high. So it's kind of a twofold approach, but yes, generally speaking, we certainly want to be using existing city-owned property to build affordable housing, and that's something that has been done and will continue to happen, especially within these corridors.
Josh, direct response?
Yeah. Yeah, the thing I want to comment, but as long as we are not including selling city land to private developers cheaply for some promise of, 5% of the units affordable to 85% of the AMI for 5 or 10 years, because that really doesn't count,
No,
right? Like,
completely agree, and that is not the intent. Sorry to interrupt you, but the negotiations are kind of not good faith. They are contractual obligations to have a substantial number of affordable units at deep affordability levels. So I guess Hannah or Sarah could speak to it a little bit more, but it is not like we are putting full faith in the private market to just do the right thing. These are heavily negotiated transactions.
Well, I guess lots of good information tonight and good kind of ideas and sharing of thoughts. Maybe, what would be useful to us in this process as well is if you have, other ideas of initiatives that you've seen elsewhere in the country that you think are really applicable or could be useful here, to achieve the objectives you've talked about. It'd be great to hear about those. You can send them on to us. I know we're kind of heading towards the end of time now, but we're certainly open and really interested in other ideas. Karen took us through some examples from elsewhere of the kinds of things that other cities are doing. So if you have ideas on things that you've seen elsewhere, policies, projects, strategies that could be applied here, then this is a good time to be communicating and pushing it, sharing those with us over the next couple of weeks. So Sarah, Hannah, do you want to talk about kind of the process overall and kind of next steps?
Sure, yeah. So we are right now is sort of in between a second and third phase of engagement. We're taking all the feedback that we've gotten from our last round of engagement in earlier this year, in February, and all of the analysis that market analysis and other sort of information from the information gathering stage, and I'm starting to piece together some draft recommendations that address the conditions we're seeing and the priorities of the community that we've heard so far. Kind of working towards probable next phase of engagement when we're ready to kind of present some concrete but still draft recommendations probably in September. So very beginning of fall, late summer. And then from there we're gonna be thinking about implementation strategies for how to make make these recommendations come to be. So still plenty of opportunity to participate. We're gonna want, you know, everyone's thoughts on the draft recommendations once those are public. So, you know, keep an eye out for those invitations later in the year. And if you have you know, thoughts on how to connect with continue to connect with communities in these areas, we'd love to hear it. We're always trying to build our reach as the project goes forward. Yeah, so I'll leave that there. Want to thank everyone for your time tonight. Realize, you know, you could be doing a lot of different things with your free time, so appreciate that you're letting us share information and sharing your thoughts too.
Thank you for the presentation. Wanda, do you have any last thoughts?
Will we get a copy of the presentation?
Yeah, we can share the slides that we've shared tonight. Yeah.
Yes, that'd be great. And like I said, we look forward to building and being more inclusive with communities that we already are part of personally or have family members that's part of, and yeah, working towards that. So I may just send you my proposal. Okay. So y'all supposed to say, yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
send it. We want to see it.
Y'all be
Yeah,
like, yeah,
I mean,
hey, a black woman.
I love.
That's what you're supposed to say. Yes. It's Juneteenth. But yes, I will.
That's good.
That'd be great.
All right. There's so much work to be done. Y'all can't do it all. Nor can I.
That's right. We
Yep.
can only do
But yeah,
one
lots of voices
by
need
piece.
to be heard.
Mhm.
Another thing too, I'll mention, these people stay in hotels too. That's where I am currently sitting right now. But I mean that's another whole different voice of people that need at, you know, there aren't any buses coming out. The closest bus stop is 4 miles from here. This particular hotel, if you don't have a car, and this particular branch of extended type state intentionally build far out, I guess because the land will be cheaper too. But that's the closest bus stop. And so if you don't really have a car here, you have to Uber or walk it. And Capitol Boulevard ain't somewhere you're trying to walk. So just letting you know, that's their mindset as these extended stays are doing. They're trying to go far out. So but there are no buses out here off of Capitol and whatever this is. So they need a BRT or something. All right. Thank you.
Thank
Mhm.
you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, all. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Mhm.
Right.